Imagine a lone American destroyer, outgunned and outnumbered, turning its ordinary smokestacks into instruments of defiance against the largest battleship ever built. What happened off the coast of Samar on October 25, 1944, would become one of the most legendary tales of naval heroism in World War II. This is the story of the USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer that used its smokestacks as weapons to shield its comrades and charge into the jaws of the Imperial Japanese Navy's center force. Amid the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, under a gray dawn sky heavy with impending rain squalls, Task Unit 77.4, known as Taffy 3, faced an armada that included the super battleship Yamato, whose 18.1-inch guns could hurl shells over 25 miles. With just 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts, the Americans were pitted against 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The air was thick with the salty tang of the ocean, and the distant rumble of thunder mirrored the approaching doom. Little did these sailors know that their ingenuity with smoke would turn the tide of what seemed like certain annihilation. To understand this desperate stand, we must rewind to the broader canvas of the Pacific War. By late 1944, the United States had launched Operation King II, the invasion of Leyte Island in the Philippines. Beginning on October 20th, General Douglas MacArthur's forces waded ashore, fulfilling his promise to return. But the Japanese Imperial Navy, desperate to halt the American advance, unleashed Shogo I, their all-out counteroffensive. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, departing from Brunei on October 22nd, comprised the mightiest surface fleet Japan had left, the 70,000-ton Yamato, armed with 9 18.1-inch guns. The battleships Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna. Heavy cruisers like Chakai, Haguro, Kumano, Suzuya, Chikuma, and Tone. Light cruisers Yahagi and Noshiro. And a screen of 11 destroyers including Gukakazi and Naoaki. This force slipped through the San Bernardino Strait undetected on the night of October 24th to 25th, after Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet pursued a decoy force northward. Opposing them was Taffy 3 under Rear Admiral Clifton A.F. Ziggy Sprague, a modest escort group supporting the amphibious landings. Its core was 6 CV-class escort carriers, USS Fanshawe Bay, Sprague's flagship, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinan Bay, Kitkin Bay, and Gambier Bay. These jeep carriers were converted merchant hulls, lightly armored with speeds of just 18 knots, armed primarily with 5-inch guns and carrying about 28 aircraft, each mostly FM-2 Wildcat fighters and TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Escorting them were the destroyers USS Johnston, DD-557, Holt DD-533, and Heermann, DD-532, Fletcher-class vessels displacing 2,050 tons, equipped with 5 5-inch 38-caliber guns, 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, depth charges, and 40 mm and 20 mm anti-aircraft guns. Rounding out the screen were 4 John C. Butler-class destroyer escorts, USS Dennis, John C. Butler, Raymond, and Samuel B. Robert Smaller at 1,350 tons, with 2 5-inch guns and 3 torpedo tubes. The men aboard these ships were a mix of seasoned sailors and green recruits, but none embodied the fighting spirit more than Commander Ernest Edwin Evans of the USS Johnston. A half-Cherokee, half-Welsh Oklahoman, Evans had declared at his commissioning in October 1943, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Under his command, the Johnston had already seen action in the Marshalls and Marianas, earning a reputation for tenacity. The strategic situation was dire. Taffy 3 was meant for ground support, not fleet battles. With Halsey's battleships away, they were the only barrier between Kurita's guns and the vulnerable landing beaches at Leyte Gulf, where thousands of American troops were exposed. The tropical weather that morning scattered rain squalls, humid air, and a choppy sea with 15-knot winds would play a crucial role in the chaos to come. As dawn broke, the Americans had no inkling that 23 Japanese warships were bearing down on them at 30 knots. By 0645 hours, the first signs of trouble emerged. Ensign William C. Brooks, a pilot aboard the USS St. Lo, spotted tall pagoda masts on the horizon during a routine patrol. Holy hell! Battleships and cruisers to the northwest, closing at high speed, he radioed. Rear Admiral Sprague, peering through binoculars from the Fanshawe Bay's bridge, could scarcely believe it. The Japanese force, 17 nautical miles away, mistook the small carriers for Halsey's fleet carriers and opened fire with salvos of 18-inch, 16-inch, and 14-inch shells, their dye-marked splashes erupting in colorful geysers around the Americans' red from Yamato, yellow from Nagato, green from Congo, the air filled with the acrid smell of cordite as the first shells straddled the white plains, shaking the ship like a ragdoll. Sprague immediately ordered a turn to 110 degrees, launching all available aircraft about 90 from Taffy 3 alone, armed with whatever they had, machine guns, depth charges, even high-explosive bombs meant for ground targets. The carriers zigzagged at flank speed, but their 18 knots were no match for the Japanese 30. Acknowledge receipt. Sprague broadcast in desperation to Admiral Halsey, over 300 miles away. Enemy battleships and cruisers sighted. Request immediate assistance, but help was hours distant. As the range closed to 15 miles by 0700 hours, the Japanese shells found their mark. A 14-inch hit on Kalinin Bay's hangar deck ignited fires, while Gambier Bay took straddles that flooded her engine rooms. Fear gripped the men as the deafening roar of artillery echoed across the water. Sailors on the carriers scrambled to man anti-aircraft guns, their hearts pounding with the realization of their vulnerability. On the destroyers, captains knew they were the only shield. At 0659, Sprague ordered, "Small boys, commence laying smoke." The destroyers and destroyer escorts activated their smoke generators' chemical canisters that produced white fog, but crucially, they also injected diesel fuel into their boilers, forcing thick black smoke to billow from their stacks. This was no ordinary exhaust. It was a deliberate tactic, turning the smokestacks into weapons of obfuscation. The black plumes, dense and oily, mixed with the white chemical smoke to create a rolling curtain that stretched for miles, clinging to the humid air and reducing visibility to mere hundreds of yards. By 0710 hours, the smokescreen was taking shape, but the Japanese pressed on. Yamato's massive turrets trained on the fleeing carriers, her shells screaming overhead like freight trains. Just 200 yards from the Fanshawe Bay, a salvo erupted, drenching the deck in seawater. The destroyer escorts, like the plucky Samuel B. Roberts, affectionately called Sammy B., joined the effort, their smaller stacks contributing to the veil. Aboard Johnston, Evans watched the chaos unfold. "All hands to general quarters," he barked. The crew, many stripped to the waist in the sweltering heat, rushed to their stations, gunners at the 5-inch mounts, torpedomen at the tubes, engineers below decks nursing the boilers to maximum output. The bitter taste of adrenaline filled their mouths as the ship vibrated with the strain of 34 knots. As the range dropped to 12 miles by 0720, more hits landed. White Plains was struck by an 8-inch shell from a cruiser, exploding her forward 5-inch gun and killing 5 men. The smoke, now a massive wall, began to pay dividends, causing Japanese radar-less ships to fire blindly. But the enemy was closing fast. At 0730, Sprague ordered the destroyers to counterattack. "Small boys, intercept and attack with torpedoes." This was Suicide 3 tin cans against battleships, but necessary to buy time. Hull and Heerman peeled off, but Evans on Johnston acted first, independently charging toward the enemy line at 0740, "Commencing our torpedo run," he signaled. Weaving through the smoke, Johnston's stacks belching even thicker black clouds to cover her approach, she closed to 10,000 yards. The crew felt the heat from the boilers, the decks slick with sweat and spray. Enemy shells bracketed her, one 14-inch hit shearing off the aftergun director, another flooding the engine room. Blood mixed with oil on the decks as wounded men cried out. Yet Evans pressed on, his voice steady over the intercom. "Steady as she goes. By 0750, just 7 miles from the lead cruiser Kumano, Johnston launched all 10 Mark 15 torpedoes, each carrying 825 pounds of Torpex explosive. What happened next would become legendary. The crisis peaked as the Japanese armada bore down relentlessly. By 0800 hours, the range had shrunk to a deadly 10 miles, and the smokescreen, though valiant, couldn't hide everything. Gambier Bay, lagging due to earlier damage, was pummeled by cruiser fire. 8-inch shells from Chikuma and Tone ripped into her thin hull, igniting aviation fuel and ammunition. Flames leaped 200 feet high, the acrid smoke mixing with the destroyer's veil. "Abandon ship!" her captain ordered at 0820 as she listed heavily to starboard. Over 800 men jumped into the shark-infested waters, oil-slicked and burning, their screams piercing the din. The carrier capsized and sank at 0907, taking 137 souls with her. Meanwhile, the destroyers were in the thick of it. USS Hull, after launching torpedoes at Congo, was caught in a crossfire. By 0830, she had taken over 40 hits. A 16-inch shell from Congo demolished her bridge, killing Captain Leon S. Kintberger and most officers. Engines failing, she drifted helplessly as Haguro's 8-inch guns finished her off. Hull rolled over and sank at 0855, with 253 dead out of 336 crew. The Samuel B. Roberts, charging like a terrier, engaged Chikuma at point-blank 4,000 yards, her 5-inch guns scoring hits that set fires aboard the cruiser. But return fire was merciless. A 14-inch salvo blew off her mast, another gutted her engine room. "We're making a torpedo run," signaled her captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland. They launched 3 torpedoes, one hitting Chikuma, but by 0915, Sammy B. was ablaze, her decks a hellscape of twisted metal and dying men. She sank at 0945, losing 89 of 224 crew. Aboard Johnston, the situation was impossible. After her torpedo launch, she was isolated, her smokestack still pouring cover but now a beacon for enemy gunners. At 0810, 3 14-inch shells from Congo struck. One obliterated the forward fire room, reducing speed to 17 knots. Another exploded in the after-engine room, killing all inside amid scalding steam. The third wrecked gun mount number 3. Shrapnel tore through the bridge, wounding Evans, who lost 2 fingers but wrapped his hand in a handkerchief and continued commanding from the fantail using a bullhorn. "The captain's hurt bad," whispered a sailor, but Evans roared back, "Keep firing!" The air reeked of gunpowder, blood, and burning fuel. Japanese destroyers closed in, their 5-inch guns raking Johnston's superstructure. By 0900, she was dead in the water, her stacks crumpled, smoke trickling instead of billowing. The crew fought on with whatever remained, 40mm guns even. 50 caliber machine guns scavenged from wrecked planes. "Boys, we're in a fix," Evans admitted, but his determination held them together. Surrounded by Yahagi and 4 destroyers, Johnston was pounded mercilessly. Everything seemed lost, the carriers exposed, the landing beaches vulnerable, the human cost mounting in the oil-choked sea. In that moment of despair, the turning point arrived through sheer audacity and the clever use of those smokestacks. Johnston's earlier torpedoes had found their mark. One detonated under Kumano's bow at 0750, blowing off 40 feet of her hull and forcing her to retire at 15 knots, escorted by Suzuya. This disrupted Kurita's formation, buying precious time. The smoke from Johnston's stacks, combined with Heermann's and the escorts, created a labyrinth of fog that baffled the Japanese. Without effective fire control radar in the squalls, their salvos went wild. American aircraft, swarming like angry hornets, exploited the confusion. TBM Avengers from Taffy 2 and 3 dropped torpedoes and bombs through the haze. At 0820, a torpedo from an Avenger struck Chokai's torpedoes, detonating them in a massive explosion that crippled her. She sank at 0840 after more hits. Heermann, the last destroyer standing, charged alone at 0825, laying her own smoke while dodging Yamato's shells. Closing to 4,400 yards, she launched 7 torpedoes at Haruna, forcing the battleship to evade and collide paths with Yamato, which turned away to avoid them, putting the super battleship out of action for 10 critical minutes as she ran north. "That little son of a bitch saved our ass," a carrier sailor later said. Sammy B's guns had meanwhile set Chikuma ablaze, and aircraft finished her with torpedoes at 0930. She sank with heavy loss. Kurita, aboard Yamato, was bewildered. Through the smoke and rain, he saw phantom ships' mirages amplified by the chaos. Believing he faced Halsey's full fleet, and with his force disorganized, fuel low and air attacks intensifying, he signaled at 0920, cease action. Rendezvous at San Bernardino Strait. The Japanese turned away by 0915, their retreat harassed by planes that damaged Tone and Heguro. The smoke had not just hidden the Americans. It had psychologically weaponized the battlefield, turning visibility into an ally for the underdogs. Evans, from Johnston's sinking deck, watched the enemy fade into the murk. "God, I can't believe it," he muttered, his voice hoarse but triumphant. The impossible had happened. The destroyer's smokestacks, pumping out that black veil for 3 brutal hours, had blinded the giant and saved the day. As the Japanese withdrew, the toll became clear. Taffy 3 had lost 2 carriers, Gambier Bay with 137 dead St. Loto Kamikaze at 1050 with 113 killed. 2 destroyers Hull, 253 dead. Johnston, 186 dead, including Evans, whose body was never found. And 1 destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, 89 dead. Total American casualties, 1,161 killed or missing, 913 wounded. The legacy endures. Taffy 3 received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. Commander Evans was awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously, cited for his indomitable courage in leading the charge. Survivors like gunner's mate Paul H. Carr of Sammy B., who fired 324 rounds before dying at his post, received the Silver Star. Official Navy reports praised the smokescreens as decisive, noting how the stack's output up to 1,000 gallons of fuel per hour created a barrier that reduced enemy accuracy by 50%. Terrain and weather, the squalls amplifying the smoke, turned the sea into a fortress. This battle exemplified the human spirit. Sailors facing death with resolve, commanders making split-second decisions weighted with lives. It reminds us of war's brutal cost, but also the triumph of ingenuity and bravery against impossible odds. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.